Hello, welcome back. I'm trying another video. I, again, am not sure where to look, so I will be looking in the wrong place. I think I'm looking in the right place, but I know I'll be looking here too, because I'm very new at this. I just wanted to catch up on a couple books that I've finished and ones that I'm starting. You'll hear my little kitty in the hallway, who is very used to me being in here working. I'm on my lunch hour now, but hopefully she'll stop trying to get my attention and settle down a little bit. So I just wanted to report on the fact that I've talked about this in my Instagram, Bookstagram account, The Left-Handed Reader, that I've finished Infinite Jest last week, I think it was. And I have to say, I touched on these things in my Bookstagram post. I'm not a full-blown book reviewer. I don't set about telling you about the plot and the characters and things like that, but more about my experience of the book. And this is definitely a journey that was worth me taking. In the journey, which took several months, I discovered David Foster Wallace's writing, which is so very unique. It is like being inside a philosopher's brain, a scientist's brain, somebody who would have been into graphic novels and fantasy and probably video games. So just such an intriguing and unique voice is his writing in this book. I haven't read any others. To talk about plot, I mean, yes, you could. If you Google this book, you'll come up with all the plot lines. It's mainly about the Incandenzia family. I have no idea if I'm pronouncing that right. And it's about a drug rehab center. And there's a third plot line, which I'm not clear about, so I'm not going to talk about it. But there is a third plot line that has to do with underground, maybe political forces. But it all centers around, first of all, tennis. At the tennis academy, and the Incandenzia family is involved in the tennis academy in a big way. I think this is Massachusetts. The drug rehab center, you keep wondering, how does this cross over with the other main plot line? And it eventually does. So that's interesting. But the whole world of the drug rehab center is so fascinating. It's a sad book. It's serious in places. That doesn't get talked about a lot. Some of the places were hard for me to read. But there are several chapters in here that are so stunningly written from the inside of a character out that they will stay with me. And I do intend to someday reread this with already having dipped in. I won't need to lean on every word and try to understand something as much as I did the first time. But much of this was beyond my understanding. Not much of it. Some of it was beyond my understanding. So don't feel like you have to understand all of it, because you might very well not. But just keep on going and enjoy the writing. I know I did. So that is a big journey that I think anyone can take. You don't need to read a single thing about Infinite Jest. You don't need to read study guides. I didn't do any of that. I just hopped in and just took it chunk by chunk. The other book that I finally got around to reading and finished the other day, because I read this very quickly, is No One Is Talking About This by Patricia Lockwood. I had thought I read this, but actually I listened to Priest Daddy, which is a really unique and a little disturbing story. And I think that's the memoir. And I feel like this is also a memoir, or it's autofiction. That's what a lot of people say, because in the acknowledgments, Patricia's acknowledging people in this story, and she's thanking her sister and her family as a whole. So you have to take it as autofiction, but it is definitely a book in two halves. That does get talked about a lot, and the second half is very sad. And I wasn't fully prepared for that. And I was reading it at night, and I had to read a bit of a palate cleanser just to get myself in the right mind frame to go to sleep, because it was sad. But I did enjoy the poetic part, the first part about the portal, which is the internet or Twitter, as I've heard some people talk about. I just love the way that she describes what it started off as in a concept and what it's evolved into, and how people and people's lives revolve on the portal. So it was good. I will always be looking for whatever Patricia's putting out. I don't think I'll always like it, or I won't like it as much. But Priest Daddy does stick with me as being like this super unusual book, and I really liked listening to it as I was doing other things. Things that I'm reading as I'm looking the wrong way. I am finally getting to, and it looks like I'm halfway through by my bookmark, Margaret Kennedy's The Constant Nymph. I have to be in the mood for a book that was written in the early 1900s. Margaret Kennedy, I read The Feast, and that was a bit confusing to me because of the fact that it works backwards. I think it's brilliantly written because of that reason. And I love the concept. I just don't think I was in the mood for it, and I didn't keep all of the characters clear in my head. And then at one point I just didn't care. So that was my fault. But I thought this was going to be a pretty tame book, but it's so funny. I mean, The Feast is funny too, but this one is like rollicking, I would say. I love the characters. It's about a bunch of people. It's about adult children. Some of them are maybe in their late teens, but I guess at this time of history, you're ready to be married if you're 16. It is adult children of a guy named Sanger. What's his first name? Albert. He's an artist or something, and he dies, and these children are blowing in the wind in this house. He had a wacky mistress. I think her name's Linda. She leaves, and a bunch of characters historically have come and visited Sanger at his house. He just holds court in this house in the Alps. And it's about how the adult children start to disperse. Some of them are getting married. Most of them are girls, except for the one boy, I think, grown man. And how this character, Lewis Dodd, had been a visitor at the house around the time that the father died, and how he gets paired up with someone in the family unexpectedly, but there's a daughter that has always had her eyes on Lewis. So I'm just enjoying it tremendously. I highly recommend it. It doesn't feel horribly old-fashioned to me. In the 1990s, I discovered Iris Murdoch, and I read, first of all, I was very happy to discover she was still alive, and I was reading a living author, because back then I was reading a lot of dead authors, and Henry James, W. Somerset Maugham, things like that, And I discovered Iris Murdoch. I read 2 of her books that weren't the older ones, and I feel like it was The Good Apprentice and The Something Pupil. I believe that I've narrowed it down to that. So I went to the library and I looked for those books, but they only had 2 others. They had The Nice and the Good and Under the Net. So I got both of them out, and I started reading this one, and I didn't start reading the other one yet. And I really got hooked on this one. I'm only a little bit in, maybe 25 pages in, but I really like it. So I'm going to keep on going with this one, and I'm not going to dip in the other one because I have a habit of doing that and then I get mixed up. But it says that this is about John Duncan, a Whitehall civil servant. He's asked to investigate the suicide of a colleague. So right in the beginning of the book, a colleague is found dead. And he's, I think, in the summer staying with this couple of friends of his, Octavian and Kate. Excuse me, Octavian and Kate on the Dorset coast. And John, I said Duncan, but it's Duquesne. John Duquesne uses their place as a refuge. And so the story unfolds. So Iris, for me, is a real character writer, and that's why I love her. So it doesn't really matter to me too much what happens. There's a plot line, but I love her character. So we'll see how this goes, but I really do want to go back to the other two Iris Murdochs that I read originally. And then the other one I have that I saw maybe in the New York Times is this book called LaserWriter 2. And it's by Tamara Shopsin. And it's so interesting. Tamara is a writer, part-time cook. She owns a restaurant in New York City called Shopsin's. She's written 2 books. This is her 3rd, it looks like. I don't know if the other ones were maybe graphic novels, but it's so interesting. It's a coming-of-age tale set in the legendary 90s indie Mac repair shop TechServe. A voyage back in time to when the internet was new, when New York City was gritty, and when Apple made offbeat computers for weirdos. I'm only a few pages in, so I can't say yet, but it's written in, it's got these cute chapter pages, analog looking stuff, and it's written in very chopped up paragraphs, so I like that so far. And it's short. It's like 200 pages or something. What else have I recently finished? Let me just consult my list. This is not my most updated list because, as I said in another video, excuse me, I keep this list online, and then I don't know why I sometimes print it out and then I start handwriting stuff. So this isn't completely up to date, but I did finally finish Howard's End, which I might have mentioned already. And I know I've finished some other books since then, but I oh, Tender as the Night. I finally finished that. I might have mentioned it in my last video that I was reading that. F. Scott Fitzgerald. I'll tell you, I loved the French Riviera setting of Tender as the Night. The characters, the couple, Dick Diver and his wife Nicole, and then there was this young woman who comes into the scene. What is her name? I'll remember it. And this young woman's mother, and Dick Diver is very attracted to her. And then that's book 1. Book 2, you go back into Dick Diver and Nicole's early relationship because Dick Diver is a psychologist or psychiatrist, and Nicole was one of his patients. And then book 3, I guess you go back into the present, but that's not clear, and I was very confused, and to me it was just too long. Oh, I know what I finished. That's not on this list, is my first Barbara Kingsolver, Demon Copperhead. And I don't have it anymore because it was a library book and I took it back. But Demon Copperhead, Barbara Kingsolver says, she used the framework of David Copperfield. She got the idea because I don't know how long ago, a couple years ago, she was staying at the home of Dickens, or one of his homes, or where he wrote. It was kind of a bed and breakfast thing. And she woke up in the middle of the night and had the idea of her book, which would be set in Appalachia, called Demon Copperhead. And it is about Damon Copperhead. I don't know what his last name really was, or if it really was Copperhead, because that's talked about in the very beginning. And I don't know, maybe it's 500 pages. but it's his life. It's a tale of Demon, which became his nickname growing up in Kentucky. Very poor, living in a trailer. Drugs come on the scene because the area is very depressed and just becomes even more depressed. And as jobs leave the area, and how he has he's in a very challenging setting, and many people are addicted to drugs or in some way involved in crime. They don't have a lot of money, and many kids graduate high school if they're lucky, some don't. People working in grocery stores and minimum wage jobs, and how there are certain and he's in the foster care system at some point, so that's very difficult for him, and how he along the way might meet certain characters who plant a seed in him, and how that might help at some points in his life. That's all I'll say. But I really cared about what was happening to him. I was rooting for him. I was scared for him, worried. Boy, for my first Kingsolver, it was a doozy, and I'm really glad I read it. And now I'm interested in reading some others, so I'm keeping my eye out at the used bookstore and at the thrift shop for some more Kingsolver. So I'd like to read another one set in Appalachia. That's an area that I'm very interested in, and I've had a couple suggestions, so if you have any, let me know. And I think that's it for now. So thanks for watching video 3.